The Fort Erie Podcast with Brent Jones. Brent Jones starts now.
Hello and welcome. That is me. I am Brent Jones. This is the Fort Erie Podcast, episode number 87. It is Saturday, May 11, 2024. Hey, tomorrow is Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. Hope you do something special that doesn't involve waiting in line 3.5 hours to get breakfast or brunch. But the real focus of today's episode is on one thing for the most part. We're going to talk about some local news, some Fort Erie questions and answers, that kind of thing. But today, the big thing, the big story, we're talking about Fort Erie Radio. Now, specifically that live hosts are going to be on air hosting shows starting this Monday, May 13th. In fact, I'll be co-hosting the morning show with Brenda Tyrrell, who some of you may know is a seasoned radio veteran. In other words, reading between the lines, she has radio experience and I don't. But anyway, I'm actually recording today's episode of the Fort Erie Podcast from right here in the Fort Erie Radio studio on Queen Street. That's 43 Queen Street, the second floor, right across the street from Little Red Coffee, if you know that spot. And unlike previous episodes where I've recorded different parts of the podcast at different times and then I sort of edit them all together at the end to make one cohesive episode, I'm doing today's episode in one take. No pauses, no stops, no editing, no redos. I'm just getting it out there. Now, if you've been living in a bubble, not to be rude, but hey, if you haven't heard of Fort Erie Radio at this point, you don't know what I'm talking about, let me take a step back and fill you in. In the previous episode of the Fort Erie Podcast, episode 86, came out a couple months ago, I said my second daughter is about to make her debut, and she did. She was born March 28th. I said I was going to be putting the Fort Erie Podcast on hiatus to focus on family, which is true. It was part of the truth at the very least, because I also said you'd hear from me later this spring because I had a second project, a new project in the works. I said you'd definitely hear from me again, and that project was the launch of Fort Erie Radio. So that's right. Let's right out of the gate. Hey, Fort Erie Radio, Fort Erie now has a radio station. And unlike the other guys, if I can say this, we don't broadcast from elsewhere in the region and call ourselves a Fort Erie radio station. We are actually a Fort Erie station. In Fort Erie, our focus is on covering news, events, and businesses in the town of Fort Erie. We have our news website, forterieradio.ca. Now, you can stream the radio station. You can play it right from the website. There's a play button at the bottom of the screen. We play a mix of news, so current events, rock music from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, a little something for everybody, and local talk segments, local talk shows with a local focus. Have I said local enough times? You can browse the current news stories on our website. Of course, we publish new content daily. That's something I'm not sure the Fort Erie has ever had, local daily news. And we have experienced reporters covering our local news, such as Nick Ferns and Luke Edwards. Live hosts, as I mentioned, are going to be on air on Fort Erie Radio starting this Monday. That includes me. I'll be co-hosting the morning show, weekdays 6 to 10 a.m. with Brenda Tyrrell. Andrea Jones, my lovely wife, she's got a midday show from 1 to 2 p.m. Stephen Passero, who's a multiple-time previous guest of the Fort Erie Podcast, former town councilor, former mayoral candidate. He's going to be hosting a show on Tuesday evenings. And another multiple-time repeat Fort Erie Podcast guest, James Kulik, you may know as also local columnist, former reporter, current marketing manager at the Fort Erie Racetrack. James Kulik is going to be hosting a show Wednesday evenings, and there will be more shows coming, more to be announced. So check keep an eye on the schedule, the show schedule on our website, because that will be changing and adapting. Now, in addition to the website, we have a smartphone app. You can stream the radio station. You can browse local news stories. You can check the upcoming show schedule. You can also stream our station from your Alexa device at home. You got one of those Alexa things sitting on your kitchen counter, just say, Alexa, open Fort Erie Radio. It's that easy. So that's what I've been working on behind the scenes, getting Fort Erie Radio launched, ready to broadcast, ready to inform and entertain. And you might think, and you're probably right, by the way, you might think I'm an absolute crazy person, that this is a crazy idea. It's the busy spring season for me in real estate, got a ton of listings. I have a newborn at home and a 2-year-old. I decided to launch a news media / broadcasting business all at the exact same time. But as the saying goes, strike while the iron's hot. And I thought, on the heels of losing the Post, the Fort Erie Post last fall, Facebook cracking down on news links, Bell selling off its 3 St. Catharines radio stations, Fort Erie has become a real news desert. And I mean that, by the way, with no disrespect to the Fort Erie Observer. Great relationship with Jen and Christine over there. Love the Observer, love what they do, but it's a bi-weekly community paper. And they may get into the news business one day. I don't know, but I thought with our town growing at the rate that it is, it's more important than ever that we have informed residents, informed citizenry. We need to have a place that reflects local voices and ideas in our community. So we're going to talk more about Fort Erie Radio throughout today's episode, but for right now, let's talk about what's making news.
News on the Fort Erie Podcast.
Well, there are a couple of stories that I want to highlight. Of course, I'm pulling these stories directly from forterieradio.ca. For starters, kicking off on Monday will be the Niagara Regional Police Spring Food Drive, which always collects a ton of donations across Niagara, a ton of cash. They will be set up for the entire week at different locations across Niagara, aiming to gather donations for local food banks and to support the community. On Monday, they will be set up at No Frills right here in town from 9 to 3. You can drop by and see them, make a donation if you can. A Ridgeway man faces impaired driving charges after colliding with a police cruiser. You can't make this stuff up. It's like an Onion headline. I guess somebody, witnesses called in, said, hey, they thought somebody was drunk and driving. And I guess what tipped these witnesses off to call police was that this dude was driving his car with a flat tire, dragging a muffler behind it. So anyway, hit a cop car, got charged. Again, can't make this up. Ontario Provincial Police, OPP's Internet Child Exploitation Investigation, one of many, I assume, but this one in particular that I'm referencing concluded at the end of February, resulted in 348 charges laid across the province of Ontario, including a 37-year-old Fort Erie man who's facing charges related to possession and accessing child pornography. Slightly brighter story, Jazzy Scoops, if you're a fan of ice cream, they're opening, they just opened yesterday on May 10th. So you can go see them on West Main Street in Stevensville. You've got until Labor Day to try all 60 flavors of ice cream that they have on the menu. You might remember that previously on the Fort Erie podcast, we did a brief segment on Siltech Corporation. That's the giant silicone manufacturer opening its third Ontario facility here in Fort Erie, expected to create a ton of jobs in the area. Well, their projected opening date on Pettit Road has been pushed back to sometime in 2025. Although construction is underway, you can drive by and see the site. They are working on it. A new pilot project introduced by the District School Board of Niagara is seeing several high schools, including right here in town, Greater Fort Erie Secondary School, keeping their doors locked all day. The focus here is on safety, both for staff and students. There will be a brief intermission during lunch hour for people to get in and get out, but the idea is to prioritize safety. And, I guess one way to do that is to keep the doors locked during the day. Back in April, there was a motorcycle rider who was wanted by police for dangerous driving throughout Crystal Beach. He tried to bait police into a high-speed chase. He was caught at last. A 20-year-old local man. He was hit with a whole slew of charges, had his license suspended, his bike impounded, that kind of thing. And just lastly, I will mention an Oakville man won $100,000 off a lottery ticket he purchased at the Avondale in Ridgeway. Joseph Azimi, I hope I'm saying his name right. He's a fellow realtor. He plans to use that money to take a vacation. Good for him. One hell of a vacation for $100,000, I'm thinking. But anyway, let's see what's on your minds here, Fort Erie.
Fort Erie questions and answers based on the Facebook group by the same name.
Now, if you aren't familiar, Fort Erie Questions and Answers is the part of the show, and this will continue on Fort Erie Radio, but it's part of the Fort Erie podcast, where I go through the Facebook group by the same name and pick out any questions and answers that I thought were especially interesting, useful, or helpful. Like, for example, Kyle asks, does anyone know the species of tree available at the town giveaway event this weekend? There were no conclusive answers. A lot of people made guesses in the comments. One commenter did say that 2 years ago, they gave away sugar maples and red maples. So you could be getting a maple tree this weekend, Kyle. Who really knows? Susan says she's in search of a butcher or a grocer that has fresh ground lamb, not frozen, must be halal. Now, tons of people said the obvious answer, what I would have thought, which was Tender Cuts, our butcher here in town. But apparently Tender Cuts does not offer halal lamb. So there were no good answers on this one, Susan. Sorry, you might need to go out of town to find fresh ground lamb, or I don't know, how much does it cost to buy a lamb? I don't know. Maybe check with some of our local farmers. Elaine asked, is anyone else finding the ticks bad this year? My husband has had 2 of them on him in the last couple of days. The general consensus in the comment from Fort Erie residents was, people are finding these things all over this year, all over their legs, their arms, their dogs. We have a guest contributor on the Fort Erie Radio website, Amanda Merles. And my God, I'm realizing this is the first time I've ever said her last name out loud, so I hope it is in fact Merles. But she runs a health and wellness business here in Fort Erie, right here on Queen Street. As I say, she's a guest contributor to the Fort Erie Radio website. And a week or two ago, she wrote a whole article on how to deal with ticks in Fort Erie this spring. That might be worth checking out on our website. And then lastly, Vanessa Marie says, I'm looking for a local electrician. Any recommendations? Now, there were a whole bunch of answers, but there were only two really local responses that I saw come up over and over again, two local electricians, those being Rida Electric and Niagara Electric. I personally have no experience with either, but there were lots of positive comments for both, so Vanessa, maybe give them a try. Anyway, I do have a thought on the topic of Fort Erie Radio that I'd like to share, so it's time for another edition of
Ranting and Raving on the Fort Erie Podcast.
Ranting and Raving is the part of the show where if I got something stuck in my craw or a bone to pick, I take this time to get it off my chest. Now, the Fort Erie Radio website, the app, the Alexa skill, all of that launched back on March 15th. Now, we don't have live hosts on the air until Monday, but, you know, it's been technically available streaming music since March 15th. Many months in the making, though. Long before March, this idea was set in motion. It started first with the idea of we need local news, and then kind of worked backwards from there to where we are right now. So the app was developed, the Alexa skill was working, our reporters have been working for months on publishing timely and relevant content. So when we pushed the website live, there were already stories there. It's not like we were starting from zero. And when I did finally push that website live back on March 15th, I kind of sat back and waited with bated breath. Fort Erie, you know I love you. Nobody does the Fort Erie podcast for 5 years and starts a Fort Erie radio station because they dislike the town. I love this place. That's no secret to anybody. But I will say this town is not always so open or eager when it comes to change. And I thought this is something new. Maybe people will hate it. They'll say it's a bad idea. They'll say this guy has no experience in broadcasting. He's got no experience in news media. What is he doing? But the amazing thing was that the responses that I got were so overwhelmingly positive. I mean, through social media, through texts, through calls, emails, comments, and things people were leaving online. I mean, we are getting at this point, without live hosts on the air, thousands of weekly listeners and website visitors. And again, unlike sort of a traditional terrestrial radio broadcast, AM, FM, where they have to use surveys and journals to kind of guess at how many people are listening, I can see exactly how many people are listening because they're all tuning in through an internet stream. And I say all that to say, you know, even the sign, by the way, I forgot to mention the sign. When the sign went up on the building here on Queen Street, all hell broke loose. It was like, man, it's official now. There's a sign up on the building. I couldn't have asked for a more positive response. So you might be saying, Brent, what does that have to do with ranting and raving? What is the problem here? Well, the comments were overwhelmingly positive, with the exception of one comment that I saw a few folks make over and over and over again, which is when they find out that Fort Erie Radio is an internet radio station, they're suddenly, I don't know, unimpressed. That's the best word I can think of. They'll ask questions like, how do I tune in? What's the station number? And it's like, well, there's not one, Karen. Relax. We don't have a station number you're going to tune in your little AM, FM dial to. That's not how this works. Fort Erie Radio is an internet radio station, meaning we have no terrestrial broadcast. There's no AM, FM dial to contend with. There are no spotty signals. There's no static. You don't have to be within like 6 feet of the transmission tower in order to pick up the signal. You stream it online. You stream it online just like everything else you do these days. It's all streamed online. It's all digital. And that does not make us any less of a legitimate radio station compared to any other. That's in fact the heart of today's Ranting and Raving segment, is that sometimes things change, and not everyone is super adept at keeping up with those changes. For example, when you turn on your TV, do you adjust the bunny ears to get a better picture? Or do you go out and adjust your antenna? I mean, of course you don't do either of those things because your TV service is digital now. It comes into your house digitally, not through analog. And radio might in fact be the only sort of medium that still relies on people having an antenna and being within 20 to 30 miles of their signal. Now, when you watch some of the most popular TV shows around the world, shows like Squid Game, Love is Blind, Stranger Things, even the latest Dave Chappelle comedy special, where do you find those? Yeah, they're all on Netflix. That's what they have in common. I mean, millions of people around the world have downloaded an app and they pay a monthly fee to access these shows on Netflix because they can't access them anywhere else. Does that mean Stranger Things is not a real TV show? No, of course not. It just means that the method of delivery has changed. And most of us understand that. Most of us have changed along with it. But and by the way, I will say, I love the idea of Fort Erie Radio one day having a terrestrial broadcast. I think that's great to give people more options. But for the cost to set that up, to have sort of, be that like 10 whatever point whatever on the dial, the cost to get that set up, to get licensed, the regulatory red tape of the CRTC, it makes the whole thing a complete mind-numbing headache. And so we're here on the internet, online, streaming, broadcasting for free, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And let's be honest, how many of you have a radio outside of your car? How many of you have a radio outside of your car? I'm guessing very few. You might have a radio sitting on your kitchen counter or a radio alarm clock. I don't know. But most people are listening to radio in their car as they're commuting to and from work. And guess what else happens when you get into your car? Well, for most of us, our phones connect to our car automatically through Bluetooth. So my thought is, rather than sort of turn the dial to an AM or FM signal, why not push a button on your phone and just listen to Fort Erie Radio on your commute? You already have the signal right in your pocket. It's an internet signal. If you got a long ways to drive, you're not going to lose our station partway through your commute. So the morning show on Fort Erie Radio, Mornings with Jones and Tyrrell, which I'll be co-hosting weekdays 6 to 10 a.m., we cover all the stuff you'd expect on a morning, say, FM radio show. We cover the news, the sports, the weather, the traffic, like news at the top of the hour, all the things you'd want in a morning show, but with the added bonus of being able to take it with you everywhere you go, not just in your car. And as far as digital streams go, by the way, radio stations, what we'll call traditional radio stations that are on the AM FM dial, they're tripping over themselves right now to get their listeners to embrace digital streams. Like, they're constantly pushing you now, download our app, or download such and such app that features a whole bunch of radio stations in our network, or stream this through our website, or listen on your smart device, like get Alexa to play it at home. Why are they doing that? Well, because I think most radio stations, and let's be honest, most radio in this country is owned by just a handful of companies, but most of them would love to see a day where analog signals totally go away. And I don't think that day is as far into the future as people think it is. I think there will always be a need for live and local radio. I just think the delivery mechanism is the part that's changing, and that's going to continue to change. So with that thought in mind, let's wrap up today's episode.
The Fort Erie Podcast.
Well, as I said, you can catch me Monday on Fort Erie Radio, every weekday for that matter, 6 to 10 a.m., Mornings with Jones and Tyrrell. Stream it at forterieradio.ca or download the smartphone app. It's available for both iOS or Android. So if you are an Android user or one of those pesky iPhone users, either way, it's free. You can use the app to browse our local news stories, check our show schedule. You can ask Alexa, just say, hey, Alexa, open Fort Erie Radio or play Fort Erie Radio. Just bear in mind, you have to say to Alexa first, Alexa, enable the Fort Erie Radio skill. Once you have said that, once you've enabled the skill on your device, you'll just be able to say, Alexa, play Fort Erie Radio going forward. And I will still tell you, I'll still remind you folks, subscribe to the Fort Erie Podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. The reason being is that the Fort Erie Podcast is not going away. No, I will not return to doing sort of weekly full feature shows because it doesn't make sense to do a radio show and also do the podcast on the side, especially when a lot of these, say, guests and news and features are going to be very similar. There will be a lot of overlap. But I will continue to upload bits and pieces, highlights from the morning show on Fort Erie Radio, some of the interviews, like guests we have on air, that kind of thing. I will take those bits and upload them as a podcast. And you're actually going to be able to access the Fort Erie Podcast from right within the Fort Erie Radio app. So how cool is that? You can actually open the Fort Erie Radio app and play episodes of the Fort Erie Podcast, including any new content that's coming. So wherever you get your podcast, subscribe to the Fort Erie Podcast, or maybe the better move, download the Fort Erie Radio app. I will mention that the Bird Box is no more. For those of you looking for the Bird Box segment today, where you can call in, squawk about anything you want, leave your messages, your thoughts, your whatever. That's no more. There's really no reason to, because you can call or text Fort Erie Radio. You can chat with us live on air. The number is 289-931-8400, 289-931-8400. Phone lines may be open while we're on the air, so you can call in and chat. If not, you can leave a voicemail that we may play on air, or you can also text us at that number anytime you'd like. But that is the show. That's the Fort Erie Podcast, episode number 87 in the books. I'm hoping you will join me live Monday morning, Monday, May 13th, 6 to 10 a.m., only on Fort Erie Radio.
You've been listening to the Fort Erie Podcast with your host, Brent Jones. Never miss an episode. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or visit theforteriepodcast.com.